Marvel has a lot of movies under its belt. The Marvel Cinematic Universe alone has 20-something movies in it by now. It's gotten to the point where it can feel pretty overwhelming as a newcomer. But besides the MCU, Marvel has had dozens and dozens of films based on their characters and properties. Probably a lot more than you even realized. And I watched every single one of them. I already made a video where I watched every DC movie, and it was my highest performing video to date. It was only natural that I would eventually pop over to the other side of the aisle and make a video on every Marvel movie. Marvel as a brand needs no introduction. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is only the most popular movie franchise in the world right now. But besides their dominance over the film landscape beginning in 2008, Marvel Comics has been one of the biggest names in superhero comics for going on a century. They have an incredibly deep well of characters and an insanely wide variety of stories that they've told over the years. To get a better sense of just how wide their movie catalog is, I dug up and watched every single movie ever made that's based on a Marvel Comics property, to give a complete picture of the franchise and help pick out which movies you might want to watch. First off, let me set the ground rules. When I say every Marvel movie, what am I including? Everything on this list fits the following 3 parameters. First, it's a feature-length film, meaning it's longer than 40 minutes. If you can finish it in the time it took for Loki to fall, it's not a movie, it's a short film.
I have been falling for 30 minutes!
But just because it's long doesn't mean it's a movie. Second, I'm not including any episodes of TV shows. TV movies are fine though. And third, they have to be officially made or licensed by Marvel. No fan films or parodies. And one final disclaimer, I don't read comics. I have little to no familiarity with the source material. I'm just looking at these movies on their own terms. Okay, let's finally get into it. I've broken things down into sections to make things easier to keep track of. The first section I'll call the early stuff. Not the really early stuff, the cheap TV movies from 50 years ago, I'll do those later. This section covers all of the earliest, big-budget theatrical Marvel movies. These are the movies that were made mostly before the MCU, the live-action standalones, pairs, and trilogies that don't really connect to anything else. Let's play a little game. Think of Marvel's massive list of characters. Which one do you think starred in Marvel's first theatrically released movie? I'll give you a minute to think. It's not Spider-Man. It's not Iron Man. It's not the Fantastic Four. I bet that based on the fact that I'm even posing this question, you figured out that it's the last one you'd expect, but even knowing that, I still bet you won't guess it. Have your guess locked in? Okay, great. Well, all of you are wrong because it's Howard the Duck. Yeah, this is the first movie released in theaters that was based on a Marvel Comics property. Why? Couldn't tell you. Blame George Lucas. Yeah, George Lucas made this movie. Howard the Duck is about a duck man from an alternate dimension where ducks are the dominant species, who gets sucked into our world and has to find his way back home. It's exactly as stupid as it looks. It's also weirdly sexual. It's not boring, I'll give it that, but I was wildly uncomfortable the whole time I was watching. Then the Blade movies. In the late 90s and early 2000s we got Blade, Blade 2, and Blade Trinity. The movies follow Blade, a half-vampire who's dedicated his life to slicing up vampires. These movies don't have much in the way of plot. If you're gonna watch them, you're mostly coming for the awesome R-rated action sequences. And maybe Wesley Snipes' weird one-liners.
Some mother always trying to ice skate uphill.
Popular opinion says that Blade 2 is the best one, and I agree. Most people also say that Trinity was a huge step down in quality, but I didn't think it was that much worse. It's so weird. So many of Marvel's characters are so ubiquitous today, but it took a really long time for them to hit the big screen. I mean, Spider-Man, their most popular character, Spider-Man didn't get a proper movie until 2002. The first Spider-Man trilogy, directed by Sam Raimi and starring Tobey Maguire, were massively popular and Marvel's first huge hits. The first movie shows Peter Parker's origin story, and has him face off against Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. The second movie, which most consider to be a big step up in quality, pits him against Dr. Octopus. And the third movie is the one with this scene. Yeah, the third movie is kind of a mess that most people only really like ironically. But to this day, this trilogy has a massive fan base who loves them and thinks they're the greatest comic book movies of all time. I didn't like them quite that much, but I totally get why they're so popular. They're silly, but in the best way. A lot of superhero movies from this era struggle to present the inherently goofy concept of superheroes in a compelling way. But the Raimi trilogy understands how to mix general campiness with serious emotional storytelling, and as a result, they really paved the road for all future comic book movies. But unfortunately, not every Marvel movie that followed in Spider-Man's wake was nearly as good. The 2003 Daredevil movie starring Ben Affleck is one such example. It's a boring, disappointing mess. So is its spin-off, Jennifer Garner's Elektra movie. Neither are worth dwelling on. If you want to see these characters in action, just watch the Netflix show. Then there's the 2003 Hulk movie, directed by Ang Lee. It's just called Hulk. Most people call it the Ang Lee Hulk movie to be more specific. This movie has the weird quirk of showing every scene transition through comic book panels. I guess Ang Lee took the phrase comic book movie too literally. This movie's pretty underwhelming. I didn't hate it, but it's just kinda dull. Next, a few Fantastic Four movies. There's the 2005 movie just called Fantastic Four, and its sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Both of them are decently entertaining, and they're solid superhero movies by the standards of the time. But they're pretty corny and cheap looking by modern standards. Then skipping ahead about a decade, there's also a Fantastic Four reboot. It's also just called Fantastic Four, but most people call it Fan-4-Stick, for two reasons. First, that's what it looks like the movie logo says, and second, it's a stupid sounding name befitting of an equally stupid movie. This thing is a mess with little to no redeeming qualities. It was made pretty much just so that 20th Century Fox could retain the rights to the franchise, and it's best left forgotten. Then we've got a couple of Punisher movies. The Punisher is one of Marvel's most popular and controversial characters. I mean, his whole deal is that he brutally murders criminals. Obviously, that's not going to be for everyone. The first appearance of the character on screen was in 1989, where he was played by 80s strongman Dolph Lundgren. This movie never got a full American release, so it's pretty hard to find. It's pretty terrible. The Punisher as a character is a terrible fit for cheesy 80s action movies. It's all mindless, corny violence with hardly any story. Later, we got a new Punisher movie properly released in theaters. This one is really strong. Besides the many epic action scenes, it has some surprisingly deep emotional complexity to its story. This Punisher movie got a sort of sequel in Punisher Warzone. Although this movie recasts its lead actor and doesn't reference any of the events in the past movie in any meaningful way. This movie is more of a mindless gore fest than anything else, only worth watching if you really love watching people's heads explode. Then there's the Ghost Rider movie. The character Ghost Rider is a motorcycle stuntman who made a deal with the devil. And just in case based on that you still weren't sure how corny these movies would be, Ghost Rider is played by Nicolas Cage. I like the way this movie looks. Lots of rad shots of skulls and flames shooting all over the place. But the story is paper thin, and it's full of Nicolas Cage being his typical weird Nicolas Cage self. The sequel, Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, is just more of the same. If anything, it's even sillier. Rounding out this section is Man-Thing. I don't know what Man-Thing is like in the comics, but I suspect that this movie isn't very faithful to them. Man-Thing is a giant swamp monster who murders people who don't respect the environment. This movie is a dumb, low-budget TV horror movie that was a slog to get through. The bar for live-action comic book movies before 2007 was super low, but Man-Thing manages to crawl under it. Don't bother checking this one out, it's a waste of your time. Okay, now that we've gotten these random miscellaneous early movies out of the way, it's time to get into the longest-running superhero cinematic universe in history. No, not that one. No, I'm talking about the X-Men movies. 20th Century Fox pumped out 13 X-Men movies over the course of 20 years, until Disney bought Fox and shut it all down, all taking place in the same canon. These movies are a big deal, and massively popular, even though their continuity is a huge mess and there are more bad movies than good ones. First up is X-Men, the 2000 movie that kicked it all off. It took the wacky and colorful comics and gave it a more grounded and realistic feel to make it more palatable to general audiences. It also introduced the world to Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, a role that he would reprise 9 more times. And chronologically, it's also arguably the first theatrical movie starring a Marvel superhero. I say arguably because Blade came first, but Blade is a far cry from the traditional superhero. I think this movie is really great. A lot of it hasn't aged well, like the effects, the general reluctance to embrace genuine comic book silliness, the director, but I have a real soft spot for it. X2, X-Men United, is the direct sequel. It's mostly more of the same. Most people rank this as better than the first, even as the best in the whole franchise, but I still prefer the first one. X-Men The Last Stand is the third direct sequel and the last of the first X-Men trilogy. And it's a mess. I think it's far from the worst in the series to date, but it's a huge letdown from what came before. Most of its problems on a story level come from these two different plotlines, the Dark Phoenix story where Jean Grey turns evil, and the Mutant Cure story. These two halves have nothing to do with one another, leading to awkward moments like when Jean Grey stands around doing nothing for the entire first half of the final battle. It's a shame because the Mutant Cure stuff had real potential and could have been great if it had time to breathe. Okay, after those three movies, things get complicated. The Fox X-Men franchise is maybe best known for its convoluted timeline above all else. As we go, I'll explain exactly how and why the series ended up the way that it did. And in addition to providing my opinions, my goal is for everyone watching to walk away from this part of the video with a working knowledge of how these movies all fit together. Without spoiling anything, X-Men The Last Stand didn't exactly leave a lot of room for another direct sequel. So Fox pivoted to making prequels and spin-offs. The next movie in the series to be released was X-Men Origins Wolverine. Since Wolverine is functionally immortal, they decided to make a movie that gives us a look at what he had been up to the 100 or so years he was around before joining the X-Men. These days, this movie is best known for introducing us to Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. No, not that Deadpool, this Deadpool. And when I say best known, I mean that this movie is infamous for taking Marvel's most talkative character and sewing his mouth shut. Besides that, the story is pretty dumb, and it's just an excuse to stitch a bunch of mindless Wolverine action sequences together. I don't hate this movie as much as everyone else seems to, but it's pretty bad. Next up was X-Men First Class, which is a prequel about a young Professor X and Magneto creating the X-Men. This gave the studio a chance to recast all the characters with younger actors going forward. This is one of the most popular entries in the series. I thought it was fine, but not super memorable. After that came a Wolverine spin-off just called The Wolverine, which takes place after The Last Stand and has Wolverine going to Japan and fighting a bunch of ninjas and robots. Probably the most forgettable entry in the series. Let's go over the timeline one more time so we're all on the same page. We have a trilogy of movies, 2 prequels, and a spin-off. X-Men Origins Wolverine is the earliest in the timeline, taking place hundreds of years in the past. Then X-Men First Class, which shows how the X-Men were founded. Then X-Men 1, 2, and 3, and then The Wolverine. Not super intuitive to a newcomer, but manageable. But after this point, where can the franchise go? There's not much of any room to expand forward or backward with any of the characters we know. Enter X-Men Days of Future Past. This was Fox's way of resetting things to give them some more wiggle room going forward. The premise is that in the far future of the original timeline, the world has basically ended. So the surviving mutants need to send Wolverine back in time to around here to change history and make sure it never happens. Spoilers, but he does, and as a result, he essentially erases all these movies from continuity, leaving a blank slate for any future movies to continue the story with all the actors from First Class. So far, I've been covering these movies in release order, but for the rest, I'm going to rearrange them so I can go in chronological order on the timeline, make things more streamlined. Continuing from the new timeline, next is X-Men Apocalypse, which has our newer, younger cast face off against the ultra-powerful mutant Apocalypse. I'm not sure how popular an opinion this is, but I think Apocalypse is easily the worst movie in the whole franchise. Worse than Origins Wolverine, worse than The Last Stand, worse than the final few movies that got gutted after Disney bought Fox. I can't pinpoint a specific reason, it's just that nothing really comes together right. The main villain is supposed to be insanely strong, but he never feels that way, and the movie acts like we know this team already, even though this is the first time we're seeing these younger iterations. It all falls super flat. After that is X-Men Dark Phoenix, which is the second movie in the franchise to try to tackle the Dark Phoenix storyline, and unfortunately this one didn't work either. It's not as bad as everyone says, but it's pretty bad. Besides all the behind-the-scenes shenanigans and endless rewrites, the core problem of this movie is that, just like Apocalypse, it operates under the assumption that we're intimately familiar with all these characters. But when it comes to these versions of them, we've only known a lot of them for one movie, so all the big character moments fall flat. I don't care that Jean Grey is evil now. It doesn't hit me in the feels when she fights her friends. I barely know Jean Grey. I barely know any of them. Also, you know what's super weird? Dark Phoenix and The Last Stand were both written by the same guy, Simon Kinberg.
Wow, if I had a nickel for every time
Simon Kinberg wrote a movie adaptation of the Dark Phoenix storyline that flopped.
I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right?
And ending this branch of the timeline is Logan. Logan takes place way far in the future when Wolverine is super old and almost every mutant has died. Logan is Wolverine's real name if you didn't know where the title came from. And Logan is really, really good. It's by far the most critically acclaimed X-Men movie, and I loved it. You have to watch some mediocre and terrible movies for it to make sense, but hey, it's still worth a watch. and that's the rough idea of the X-Men movie timeline. There are approximately 8 billion inconsistencies and minutiae that don't make sense, but this is the general idea. The whole franchise ended in a position where there's really no good starting point for a newcomer. It's all such a tangled mess that virtually every movie has context that you'll be missing if you watch it first. And also, that's not even all the movies. I still need to mention New Mutants. This was the last movie in the franchise to be released, and it was stalled in development for years. It doesn't really fit anywhere in the timeline. It presumably goes somewhere here-ish. The movie itself is a barely coherent mess, obviously plagued by reshoots. And of course, I couldn't leave out the Deadpool movies. They also don't fit cleanly anywhere on the timeline, and also go somewhere around here. Being goofy parodies, it's not like they care much about continuity anyway.
Let us go talk to the professor.
McAvoy or Stewart? These timelines are so confusing.
The first Deadpool is a ton of fun. It was a breath of fresh air when it first came out, poking fun at all the dumb stuff we'd seen over and over again in so many superhero movies. Deadpool 2 is pretty much more of the same. I didn't think it was quite as good, but I liked both movies a lot. Okay, I put it off for long enough. It's time to talk about the MCU. The reason why most people even care about Marvel at all, and the biggest film franchise of all time. I'm going to abbreviate this section of the video as much as I can, because seriously, do you really need me to explain the MCU? There are thousands of videos about every single one of these movies, so I'm not going to review each MCU movie individually. The whole point of these movies is to be homogenous to the point where they're more like one big project than individual films, so it makes more sense for me to do a general overview. Real quick, it's worth going over who owns the rights to which Marvel characters. In the 90s, Marvel sold the movie rights to its most popular characters. Sony got Spider-Man, 20th Century Fox got the Fantastic Four and X-Men, and Universal got a weird joint custody thing with the Hulk. Later, when Disney bought Marvel Comics, they wanted to make their own Disney-owned Marvel movies, but they were left with the slightly less well-known properties: Iron Man, Captain America, Thor. This is why the MCU began the way that it did. The first few movies of the MCU are known as Phase 1, and it starts things off pretty simply. Iron Man, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger. A bunch of origin stories to introduce us to all these characters. The Incredible Hulk is notable for being one of the least connected movies in the entire franchise, especially since Edward Norton's Bruce Banner was replaced with Mark Ruffalo for all future movies. Then Phase 1 caps off with The Avengers, the big crossover movie between them all. This movie was a massive hit, and is the single biggest thing that propelled the MCU into the success of today. Then Phase 2. Things are still more loosely connected, mainly just through making direct sequels to Phase 1 movies or referencing the big battle that happened in Avengers. Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, and then our second big team-up movie, Avengers Age of Ultron, and capping things off with Ant-Man. This is the point where the MCU got popular enough to experiment and bring in some of the more obscure properties, trusting that audiences would be along for the ride no matter what. Phase 3 is when the MCU really hit its stride. The early years had some real duds, but Phase 3 is much more consistent in quality, and there's not a single movie in it that I would describe as actively bad. Plus, things cross over way more now, and most movies require having seen several other movies to fully understand. Captain America Civil War, Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man Homecoming. Oh, I should mention that Disney and Sony struck a deal to share ownership of Spider-Man so they could appear in the MCU, which Sony agreed to for various reasons that I'll explain later. Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Avengers Infinity War, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Captain Marvel, and then the big finale, Avengers Endgame, which wrapped up the overall story and served as a send-off to a bunch of the original characters. And then as a sort of coda to it all, Spider-Man Far From Home. But even though that was the finale of the story, there's no way a powerhouse franchise like this would just end. The MCU is currently finishing up Phase 4. The movies so far aren't so strongly connected to one another, at least not yet. After Endgame, it seems to be taking more risks and expanding to even more obscure and unique characters. Black Widow, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Eternals, Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, Thor Love and Thunder. It keeps on chugging along with no signs of slowing down. With so many movies, thankfully, the timeline is way more straightforward than the X-Men movies. The vast majority of the movies take place in the order that they came out in, aside from some simple exceptions. Captain America 1 takes place in the 1940s, Captain Marvel takes place in the 90s, Guardians 2 takes place right after Guardians 1, and Black Widow takes place after Civil War. It's super easy to sit down and watch through all of them without much confusion, by design. The people in charge of these movies have put in a ton of effort to make sure that the average person can enjoy what they're watching, no matter how big and complex things get. Since Disney bought 20th Century Fox, they've reclaimed the rights to the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, which is why the Fox X-Men universe ended, by the way. So expect to see these characters make their way to the MCU in the near future. Between that and their deal with Sony for Spider-Man, Disney has full access to pretty much every character they could want. And just for the heck of it, why don't I also list every TV show connected to the MCU? You have the early stuff, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter. You have the Marvel Netflix shows, which mostly exist in their own little bubble and rarely, if ever, reference the movies. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, The Punisher, and their crossover series The Defenders. Then there are the weird, random shows that connect pretty much just in name only, that you would only know were part of the MCU if you looked it up. Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, Hellstrom, and Inhumans. And finally, once Disney Plus came out, Marvel started making shows on there that actually had tangible connections to the movies. WandaVision, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, What If, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Ms. Marvel, and She-Hulk. Okay, this is a totally random tangent, but I really want to talk about this one thing, and I'm not sure when I'll get another opportunity. So, Agent Phil Coulson is a character who dies in the Avengers movie, but then Marvel wanted to have him in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show, so they brought him back to life in a very hand-wavy way. Anyway, in the pilot of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., another character, Grant, says this.
I'm clearance level 6. I know that Agent Coulson was killed in action before the Battle of New York.
And then Coulson steps out of the shadows and says,
Welcome to level 7.
But wait, the way Grant says that I'm level 6, I know he was killed, implies that it's a secret that Coulson died and no one below level 6 ever heard about it. And when Coulson says, welcome to level 7, that implies that everyone level 7 or higher knows that his death was fake. So if everyone below level 6 never knew he died, and everyone above level 6 knew that the death was fake, that means that level 6 agents, and only level 6 agents, think Coulson is dead. No joke, I think about this moment at least once a month.
You're not the only one cursed with knowledge.
That's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Besides its unstoppable stranglehold on the entire film industry, the most remarkable thing about it is its consistency. The movies are all very similar, and while some people take issue with that, it's a feature, not a bug. Watching all of them feels way more like keeping up with a serialized TV show than a series of movies. That's why I treated them like a set rather than review them individually. Aside from a few standouts, they're the same across the board in style and quality. Ever since the MCU made it big, Sony has been trying to capitalize on its ownership of Spider-Man to launch some kind of cinematic universe of its own, to less than impressive results. They made the Raimi movies back in the day, and in 2012 they rebooted the character with The Amazing Spider-Man, starring Andrew Garfield. Then they made a sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which was a critical and commercial flop, and killed Sony's hopes of making this into a long-running series. Which is a shame because I think both of these movies are a lot better than people give them credit for. They're not great, but still worth checking out if you like the character. Besides their many movies starring Peter Parker as Spider-Man, Sony's biggest and best hit was the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, starring the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man. This movie is so good. Besides the fact that it wholly embraces wacky comic book concepts like the multiverse, it's so full of heart and charm and a unique visual style that I can't recommend it enough. And back on the live action side of things, Sony's more recent movies have gone in a, strange direction. So after making a deal with Disney to lend them Spider-Man for the MCU, they weren't about to make new solo Spider-Man movies on their own. They'd be competing with themselves. Instead, what they decided to do is launch a series of movies based on other Spider-Man related characters, which they also had the rights to. Basically, they've been making movies starring Spider-Man villains, but twisting them and turning them into anti-heroes. The first movie in this series is Venom, which is such a weird, hard to describe movie. Most things in it are terrible, except for the hilarious dynamic between Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock and the alien parasite Venom as they share a body. Moments in the movie that show off that relationship sparked a ton of fan engagement online with fanfiction and the like. It's fun in theory, but when you actually sit down and watch the movie, there's a lot of other more boring and generic stuff in between that make watching it a slog. Its sequel, Venom Let There Be Carnage, figured out what worked best about the first one, and gave us more of that relationship dynamic, but its plot is even stupider. And, in my quest to watch every single Marvel movie, I also accomplished something else pretty unique. I became the first person in existence to watch Morbius. Okay, I know that's a long dead meme at this point. But Morbius definitely deserves its pathetic reputation. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but it's easily the worst superhero movie that's come out in the past 10 years. This next section is what I'm calling the, "Hey, I didn't know that was Marvel" section. These are big blockbusters that most people don't even realize were based on an obscure Marvel comic. First up is the Men in Black movies. Yeah, those were Marvel. The first Men in Black movie starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones is one of the all-time great action comedy blockbusters. It's so much fun. I especially love the cheesy old-fashioned CG alien designs. I had heard bad things about the sequels, and Men in Black 2 was exactly what I expected. A boring, low-effort cash grab. The story is bland and uninspired, and it's just an infinitely worse version of the first movie. However, I was pleasantly surprised by the third movie. Men in Black 3 really deepens the characters and goes in a creative and interesting direction. I'm not sure if other people feel this way, but I think it's almost as good as the first movie. More recently, the franchise was soft rebooted with Men in Black International. Lots of people covered this to death when it came out. It's exactly as bland and unfunny as everyone says it is. Then there's... Okay, I'm not going to say the title of this movie. I know it's silly, and I'm outing myself as a massive square, but there's a curse word in the title, and I don't like cursing for personal reasons. Anyway, this movie is about a teenager in the real world who decides to put on a costume and be a real-life superhero. It's a ton of fun, and a great early example of a lighthearted critique of superhero tropes. Its sequel is mostly more of the same. You know what else was based on a Marvel comic? Big Hero 6. This movie is a lot of things at once. It's a superhero movie, it's a Disney movie, it's an anime movie. And I'd say it juggles all these genres pretty well. And even if it didn't, Baymax alone is enough to make it worth a watch. Rounding things out for this section are the Kingsman movies. They're action spy movies that serve as a light parody of stuff like James Bond. I really love the first one, Kingsman: The Secret Service. It's got incredible action and a fun, breezy tone. There's really not much else out there like it. The sequel, Kingsman: The Golden Circle, is significantly dumber. It's still a lot of fun, but it's really more of a turn your brain off kind of action movie. There's also a prequel movie, The King's Man, which tells the story of how the Kingsman organization was founded. It's pretty rough. The story is all over the place, and it can't figure out what it wants to be. I found it really disappointing. Alright, we've covered all the movies that people actually care about, the ones with big budgets that were released in theaters. Now, we're going obscure. Really obscure. This next section is all about the many cheap TV movies released across the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Long before the superhero boom of the 21st century, Marvel was doing everything it could to bring its characters to broad audiences through film. So they scraped together lots of low-budget productions to get their properties in front of as many eyeballs as possible. Did it work? For the most part, no. These movies are pretty much all garbage. The process of A, tracking them all down, and B, actually sitting down and watching these was a chore. But they're a cool piece of history, I guess. A lot of these movies were backdoor pilots to TV shows that never got released, or were otherwise connected to TV shows. So when it came to my no TV episodes rule, I had to make a lot of judgment calls about what counted and what didn't. So if you're thinking about leaving a comment at the end saying, "Hey, you forgot this one," it probably wasn't because I forgot it, I just decided not to include it. First on the list is a 1979 Captain America movie. It is god-awful. It has barely anything connecting it back to the original character other than the super soldier serum, and even that is pretty different. It's super slow with hardly any action, and the action it does have is terrible. And Captain America spends way more time riding around on a motorcycle than he does fighting bad guys, to say nothing of the ridiculous costume. It also has a sequel, Captain America 2: Death Too Soon, which at least Captain America spends more time doing Captain America stuff in this one, like using his shield, but this is mostly just as bad. These movies are best left forgotten. Next there's a Doctor Strange movie from 1978, and, as you can imagine, they did not have the special effects technology to do this character justice. Also, Doctor Strange is not an abrasive jerk in this, and while I'm not an expert in comics lore, that seems pretty integral to his character. You can imagine that cheap TV movies about superheroes from this far back in time are destined to be terrible. This and the Captain America movies are basically unwatchable. There's a trio of movies that were continuations of the 70s Hulk TV show. I didn't watch the show, but that didn't seem to matter too much. The first one is The Incredible Hulk Returns. Thor is also in it, and I think he might get more screen time than the Hulk. After that is The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, where Banner gets arrested and put on trial. Daredevil's in it, that's neat. The trilogy ends with The Death of the Incredible Hulk. I'll admit, at this point, I was so bored with the series that I was barely paying any attention. None of these movies did anything for me. Okay, at this point, I've watched 5 solo Hulk movies. None of them were very good. And I've come to realize something that I think is a pretty fundamental problem with writing this character. The Hulk has no agency. When he's Banner, he spends all his time going, "No, I don't want to turn into the Hulk," and cowering and hiding. And when he's the Hulk, he's full of mindless rage with no control over his own actions. Hulk is fine if all you want is mindless action, but he's really hard to tell a compelling story with. In these solo movies, he barely ever gets to make any decisions or take any actions that affect the story. He's a completely passive character. When he's in an ensemble, he can bounce off of other characters, but if somebody held a gun to my head and made me write a good solo Hulk story, I don't think I could do it. In 1990, we had another Captain America movie. It's not terrible. It basically gets the job done when it comes to telling his origin story and giving us scenes of him in World War II and the present. It's better than the 70s version, at least. The 1994 Fantastic Four movie genuinely surprised me by how good it was. It's probably the only movie from this era that I didn't find boring. It's the same plot as both of the more recent versions, but it had a lot of heart, and the characters each had genuine personality. And this is a small thing, but I appreciated that they all had brightly colored costumes. It really made a difference, especially since I could only find most of these movies in 360p. Generation X is an X-Men adaptation. It isn't the worst of these movies, but it's definitely the weirdest. There are almost no major X-Men characters in this, not even Professor X. And the whole plot revolves around a villain making a dream machine, which has nothing to do with the mutants or their powers. So I was perpetually forgetting that this was supposed to be an X-Men movie. And wrapping this section up is Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. It stars David Hasselhoff as the version of the character before the comics redesigned him to look like Samuel L. Jackson in order to entice him to play the role. Yeah, that's real. Look it up. Most of these TV movies are just plain bad. This is the only one that gets more into so bad it's good territory. Somewhat entertaining, but still pretty terrible. Last section. Direct-to-home video animated movies. I had high hopes for some of these. When I did my DC movies video, the animated movies were some of the best ones. The smaller audience meant that the filmmakers could take some real storytelling risks and make something that stands out. Not so with Marvel. After watching them all, I found that the catalog of animated Marvel movies is full of some of the laziest, cheapest, blandest, low-effort stuff you can imagine. It's clear to me that the people making these things assumed that the only people watching these were little kids who only wanted to see characters they recognized and didn't care about anything else. So, as not to repeat myself, I'm just going to list off a bunch of these rapid fire to get through all the mediocre ones as quickly as possible. Then after that, I'll talk about the couple of them that were actually decent. Iron Man and Hulk Heroes United. Atrocious 3D animation and barely any plot. Iron Man and Captain America Heroes United. Exactly the same. Iron Man Rise of Technovore. An anime-style movie with really great-looking animation, but a bland and boring plot. Avengers Confidential, Black Widow, and Punisher. Same as Technovore. Cool-looking anime visuals, boring story. Planet Hulk. Looks like it could have been fun, but I forgot everything that happened right after I watched it. The solo Hulk movie curse strikes again. The Invincible Iron Man. An Iron Man origin story. It's fine. Next Avengers Heroes of Tomorrow. In a post-apocalyptic future where the Avengers have all been wiped out, their kids take up the torch. It's not bad, but it's made for younger kids, and the kid-friendly tone really clashes with the dark storyline. Hulk vs. This could technically count as 2 movies, but I'm counting it as 1. Hulk fights Wolverine in the first half and Thor in the second half. It's all action and barely any plot. Marvel Superhero Adventures Frostfight. Loki tries to kidnap Santa Claus, which pretty much says it all right there. This is for babies. Hulk Where Monsters Dwell. A Hulk and Doctor Strange team-up Halloween movie. It's okay, but once again the story is very clearly secondary to superheroes punching each other. Okay, now on to the decent ones. Ultimate Avengers is about the formation of the Avengers. It shares a lot in common with the MCU Avengers movie, but with a slightly different roster. It's nothing amazing, but it's leaps and bounds ahead of most other animated movies on this list. Its sequel, Ultimate Avengers 2, has the Avengers going to Wakanda and teaming up with Black Panther. It's a bit of a step down in quality, but it's still pretty good. There's a 2007 Doctor Strange movie, either just called Doctor Strange or Doctor Strange the Sorcerer Supreme. It's a pretty straightforward Doctor Strange origin story. I can see a lot of people using this movie as a gateway to getting into the character before the MCU movie came out. Those last three were decent. Not amazing, just competent. Which is more than I can say for most other animated Marvel movies. I was starting to think that they were all irredeemably bad. And then I watched Thor: Tales of Asgard. And finally, I found one that wasn't just good, but genuinely great. It came out alongside the first MCU Thor movie, but this is easily better. This was the first and only Thor story I've seen that actually made me interested in the world building of Asgard. And Thor, unlike every other animated movie where the superheroes are just vessels for mindless action, is an actual character with complex emotions. It was such a breath of fresh air after sitting through so much garbage. The other animated movie that I thought was genuinely good was Marvel Rising Secret Warriors. It follows a team of teenage Marvel heroes, focusing mostly on Kamala Khan's Ms. Marvel and Squirrel Girl. More than any of the others, this is a movie made for kids and teens, but even as an adult, I thought it was really well made. It's just a lot of fun, and the characters are relatable and compelling. In a lot of ways, it has the feel of a backdoor TV pilot, and that's because it kind of is. It has a series of follow-up short films, but none of them are feature-length. Almost done. There are only 2 left, and they're weird ones. Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned is an anime movie from the 80s based on a Marvel comic based on Dracula. It's the kind of thing where you would never know it was a Marvel movie unless you looked it up. This version of Dracula, besides the general aesthetics, is nothing like the original version of the character. In this movie, Dracula is a good guy, protecting innocents and fighting those who blindly hate him. It's a very weird, super corny, and extremely dated movie. And finally, similarly, there's Monster of Frankenstein. It's also an animated movie based on a Marvel comic based on Frankenstein. This one is actually kind of good. It's different from the original story, but not by so much that it's unrecognizable. The plot focuses mostly on Victor Frankenstein trying to cover up his creation of the monster from the police. And even though that's different from the book, it depicts the idea of Victor as an emotional wreck that's still true to the spirit of the book. The English dub is full of over-the-top reactions that's pretty hilarious a lot of the time, and it has a lot of so bad it's good moments. But the story is compelling, and the last act tugs at your heartstrings in some shockingly effective ways. I liked it more than I thought I would. And that's every Marvel Comics movie ever made. The grand total stands at 104 movies. I'm exhausted. I have to be honest, this whole process was not an enjoyable experience. There are way more bad movies in the list than good ones. And when you're not looking at the MCU, which I was already caught up on, that ratio gets even higher. There were just so many TV movies, direct-to-video movies, and generally bland movies that by the end I was begging for this to be over. Marvel has pumped out so much garbage. I had no idea just how much until I had to stare down the barrel of watching it all. But now that I have, I can really dig into the analysis of Marvel as a franchise and examine what makes it tick. The first really interesting thing that I found is that you can use the totality of Marvel's films to trace the history and evolution of superhero movies. They started with the early stuff, the low-budget TV stuff, struggling to find an audience beyond niche comic book nerds. But then it was Marvel who broke through the barrier and brought superheroes to Hollywood. Or I should say back to Hollywood. There were some Superman and Batman movies, but they were more of a passing fad than anything with staying power. The 1-2 punch of X-Men in 2000 and Spider-Man in 2002 proved to everyone that there was a mainstream audience for this kind of thing. But as the first Marvel superheroes made it to the big screen, you see an issue that plagued almost all of them. Something I call early 2000s superhero movie syndrome. What I mean by that is, when you watch these early movies, you get a strong sense that everyone involved was embarrassed. Superheroes still had a stigma. From 2000 to 2008, with every Marvel movie that came out, you can imagine some studio executive in pre-production going, okay, we have the rights to this dumb baby kids property. How do we make it less cringe so that non-losers will pay us money to watch it? As a result, you constantly get movies that try to diminish the comic booky elements of the characters.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
And this reluctance to embrace the source material mostly resulted in lots of bland and terrible movies. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies stand as the lone exception. They're not afraid to be corny, and I think that's what gave them their cultural longevity. But by 2008, the tide began to shift, and people became willing to take superheroes more seriously. Iron Man marks a turning point, not just as the birth of the MCU, but as the first movie that seemed to treat the story like it matters. After that, superhero movies exploded. Before long, the market became saturated, leading to more innovation and creativity. Things like Guardians of the Galaxy, Deadpool, Logan, and Into the Spider-Verse pushed the formula to new heights. That initial reluctance to embrace the cheesiness is gone today, for the most part.
Sorry, what was your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
Wait, no, seriously, what's your actual name?
I've seen countless jokes at the expense of people who don't know which superheroes are DC and which ones are Marvel. And I understand that to an outsider, it might seem like they're the same, just with different people owning the rights. But there's more that separates them. Marvel has a specific design philosophy for their characters that makes them stand out as quintessentially Marvel. Marvel superheroes are relatable, with clearly defined, three-dimensional personalities and flaws. Marvel heroes spend a lot of time with the mask off, dealing with personal issues. They're more powerful than we are, sure, but they're still human beings who are doing their best to handle very human problems, even as they're fighting supervillains. This is in contrast to DC's collection of broad, simplistic, malleable characters that tend to be pretty distanced from the everyday civilians. My best guess as to why that is that besides Captain America, most of Marvel's superheroes were created in the 60s instead of the 40s. That simplicity of the Golden Age didn't fly anymore. Audiences wanted something more down to earth. This creative mission statement that every superhero has to have a very specific and complex personality also helps to explain something that I've wondered about for a while. Marvel's trend of passing the torch to new characters. Miles Morales as Spider-Man, Sam Wilson as Captain America, Jane Foster as Thor, etc. Golden Age DC characters like Batman and Superman are such broad archetypes that their personalities are easily molded into whatever the writers need. But the specificity of Marvel's characters means that passing on the mantle is the only way to get something truly different. Relating to all this, before I had seen all these, I had heard and read some things about how Marvel's characters all exist in something resembling the real world. Stan Lee once said that he wanted to create characters you could imagine showing up in your own backyard. I never really understood what that meant until now. DC superheroes exist in a hyper-stylized version of the world that exists to complement them as characters. For example, Batman lives in Gotham City, a cartoonishly dark and gritty place that is basically designed from the ground up to host Batman stories, a sandbox for the writers to play around in. The settings in DC are loose, and serve to accentuate the superhuman qualities of the superheroes. Marvel doesn't do that. The Marvel Universe is based on the real world and real places. The superheroes encounter and deal with things that we also see in the real world all the time. The world of Marvel is as big and complex as the real world. Instead of the superheroes shaping the world, like in DC, the world shapes the heroes. And that makes the superheroes feel a lot more like real people. Just like us, they're all struggling to find their place and leave their mark. That discussion leads me back around to the MCU. Being the most profitable movie franchise in history, there have been loads of copycats in the last decade, but all of them have failed. Even other Marvel properties like Fox X-Men and The Amazing Spider-Man. But the reason for the MCU's success goes beyond lightning in a bottle. This aspect of superheroes feeling like real people, feeling like part of the larger whole, is what makes it work. By making the heroes feel small and the world feel big, the MCU sells you on the idea that they can all exist together, populating their own corners of the world and crossing over at will. This design is what allows the MCU to overcome the most significant hurdle of sustaining a cinematic universe. I mentioned earlier that the MCU is more like a TV show than a series of movies. But film and TV are different mediums. Films need a strong beginning, middle, and end. The reason why there are so few long movie series is because every movie's ending needs to be big. If the end is too big, too much of a shakeup to the status quo, then there's not enough room to continue the story. This is why the X-Men universe kept having to reboot and retcon itself. If, in an attempt to lay the groundwork for future movies, the end is too small, audiences will feel cheated out of a complete story, the movie will bomb, and you'll never get to make those future movies that you set up, like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The MCU hit that sweet spot by telling engaging individual stories with individual heroes, but never making any one hero feel too huge or world-shattering. I keep talking about the MCU as if it's this single, clearly defined thing. But more recent years have shown us that this isn't the case. Now that Disney owns Fox and worked out a deal with Sony for Spider-Man, they have control of basically all their characters. And crucially, all the old movies based on their characters. Phase 4 of the MCU has really opened things up to exploring other versions of these characters. More and more, the MCU is pulling in and referencing other movies not made by Disney. Plus, Sony's Spider-Man Villains universe basically survives by connecting itself to the MCU wherever it can, and tricking casual audiences into thinking that they're a part of it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is evolving into a Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, where the totality of Marvel film can be theoretically connected into one giant franchise. Which, if it works, is great news for Disney, who now has a backlog of dozens of old movies it can sell to people that otherwise nobody would care about. If I put the whole corporate greed aspect of the idea out of my mind, I think that's really cool. As you can probably tell, I tend to be a real completionist when it comes to media franchises. And this is a solid way of making it feel like all these hours I spent watching these movies mattered. However, I can see this becoming really annoying for casual fans, who just want to check out a fun action movie and end up having to sit through 25 years worth of references to movies they haven't seen. There's a good chance Marvel movies will become more and more niche as time goes on. I'm very curious to see if the MCU in its current stage is sustainable for the long term. Time for some recommendations. Which Marvel movies do I think are worth checking out? Well, that's not an easy question, since it's more than just a question of which movies are the best. Too many of these require context from other stories to understand. Like, probably my favorite movie out of this entire list is Spider-Man No Way Home, but you need to watch, at minimum, like 15 other movies for it to make any sense. From the MCU, the movies that I would pick out as exceptional standalones that you can watch out of context are Guardians of the Galaxy, Black Panther, and kind of Spider-Man Homecoming. I can easily say that watching the entire MCU in order is something worth doing, but if you're not willing to take that plunge, these few are still a great watch. From the X-Men movies, check out the first one, Logan, and Deadpool. Definitely watch Into the Spider-Verse. It's a critical darling for a reason. And the first Kingsman movie is a top-notch action flick. You already forgot that one was on this list, didn't you? And I know there's a small group of people who will demand my head on a pike if I don't give the Raimi Spider-Man movies a shout-out. They're not really my cup of tea, but they're well-made movies that are crucial to the development of the genre, and there's a good chance you'll enjoy them if you don't mind a little camp. Surprisingly, not that many of these movies are on Disney+. All the MCU movies are, but not much else. I thought that at least the animated movies would be on there, but no, most of them aren't. A lot of the X-Men movies and the older stuff are on Hulu, because Disney also owns that. A significant chunk of these movies are really hard to find. For a lot of them, I had no choice but to
Purchase them legally from a reputable source.
It was pretty annoying. I get the feeling that Disney doesn't want all these bad old movies diluting their brand. What's coming down the pipeline for Marvel? The MCU is still going strong at 3 movies per year. Shortly after this video comes out, we'll finish Phase 4 with Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I'm not sure what to expect from it, since it'll have to tell a Black Panther story without Black Panther after the death of Chadwick Boseman. In December we'll have the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special releasing on Disney+, although I don't know if that's a full-length movie or not. Then in 2023, Phase 5 begins with Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and The Marvels, a Captain Marvel sequel. Now that Disney has a firm grip on every Marvel character, expect virtually every Marvel movie that comes out to be part of the MCU, with the exception of whatever Sony's doing. Despite Morbius flopping, they're continuing down this road of a Spider-Man villains without Spider-Man universe, with increasingly obscure characters like Kraven the Hunter and Madam Web, all building to a Sinister Six movie where they all team up with Michael Keaton's Vulture from the MCU.
I'm still figuring this place out, but I think a bunch of guys like us should team up. Could do some good.
All of which I have extremely low expectations for. But on the other hand, they're making sequels to Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, and Beyond the Spider-Verse, which I'm super excited for. No direct-to-video movies coming up. Disney seems to have shut that whole department down. Besides the Marvel Rising stuff, there haven't been any in the last 6 years and counting. Going through this whole process meant forcing me to watch lots of terrible, boring movies. But that doesn't mean I have a low opinion of Marvel. The high highs on this list prove that stories with these characters can be really great. The rights to Marvel properties have been horrendously mismanaged for decades. Now that they're all in one place, and can have stories that connect with one another, as they were always meant to, I expect we'll be seeing lots more quality films coming down the pipeline. I'm ready to keep up with the MCU for the foreseeable future, to see what they do with these characters going forward.
He's
Spider-Man.
He's
Spider-Man.
You're
Spider-Man.
I'm
Spider-Man.
Are there any other
Spider-Man.
I should know about?
地獄からの使者 Spider-Man!